Hello, my amigas. Thanks so much for being here today. We have two very special guests with us today. I'm so excited. We've been wanting to get them here for a year, but because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to. Stay tuned because they're here. So I'm so excited today to introduce a long time, one of the OG amigas, my good friend, Michelle. And then with Michelle is Newberry, the skilled canine support companion. So what we're going to talk today is about just service dogs, how they can help your child with a disability, autism, and Michelle's just going to break it all down. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Sure, happy to be here.
As you know, I wanted to get you guys here. We've talked about this for a year, and then the pandemic hit, and then finally we just said, you know, we just need to do that. Because in the year since we started talking about having you guys on Life with a Side of Autism, Newberry has retired.
He has retired.
So would you just give us a little bit of background? I know you've been on the channel before, but just reintroduce people, reacquaint them with you and what you do, and then introduce everybody to Newberry.
Yeah, sure. I am a parent of a 23-year-old with autism, and she has fairly significant needs, and also been a longtime advocate of health insurance coverage for people with autism, basically for 20 years now. So, and I always thought that service dogs were for people with physical disabilities only. And when our friends got a service dog for their son who has cerebral palsy, I just saw how much he helped our friend and was asking them questions about it, and they said that there was a couple people with autism in their graduating class with Canine Companions for Independence. So I thought, well, I want to look into this. I want to see if it's going to help my daughter, because she was social but not appropriate, didn't really know how to approach people, and you know, sometimes people just are afraid to approach people with disabilities when they don't know enough about it, and so they avoid instead of asking questions. So we wanted to make it easier for her and for other people to approach her. So we looked into it and found out that they had a wonderful program very close by in Ohio with Canine Companions for Independence, and that they certainly did place dogs with people with autism. So we applied. And initially it took 3 years on a waiting list to get the dog. It's a much quicker process now. This was over 10 years ago. And part of the reason for that is that Canine Companions for Independence is a non-for-profit. And so they don't make the families pay for the dog. It costs about $45,000 for Canine Companions to breed, raise, and train their skilled companions. And so they're very particular about who they award them to. And so they have a very specific process, including interviews and placement interviews, and looking at what you expect from a dog and looking at what a dog can do for you. And then they look at the dogs that they have coming through their training program to see if there are at least 3 that match with what your needs are. And then if they have 3 that will match with what your needs are, then you get invited to the in-person training. And that is 40 hours of training with them, with their instructors, to make sure that you don't undo all the great training that they did to make these dogs so helpful and so skilled, and to be able to perform their jobs in public, being what they call invisible. Kind of the greatest compliment to a service animal out in public is that people don't know they're there. That when you get up to leave the restaurant or you get up to leave the movie theater, people go, oh my gosh, there was a dog in here. And I remember our first trip with Newbury, we took him to Puerto Rico. And when we got off the plane, we could just hear people exclaiming all over the plane, oh my gosh, there's a dog in here, oh my gosh, there's a dog in here. And that was such a great compliment to CCI, to Canine Companions, for training him so well that he was invisible, just like he should be. So,
what kind of dog is Newberry? What kind of what's his breed?
He is a Golden Retriever, Labrador Retriever cross. And so Canine Companions has their own breeding program, and they found that at least for this type of service dog, they found that using either a Labrador Retriever, a Golden Retriever, or a mix brings out the best workers in the dogs. And they have a nice mix of wanting to please with also having the skill to be able to do their job, not be too independent that they take their skills and use them for their own devices. Because these dogs are trained to open up doors, close doors, open drawers and close drawers. And so you don't want a highly skilled dog that can open up the pantry and avail themselves of all the food. So you want to make sure that the dog is well trained, but also is under control and using their skills to benefit the person they're working for.
So I have so many questions. So
Yeah.
Newberry is 12.
He is 12.
And he's retired now.
Yes.
So how did you make the decision that it was time for him to retire?
Sure. Well, a service animal, to have public access and to help their person have public access, they have to be able to do certain things. They have to be able to jump in and out of cars. They have to be able to, I call it donutting. I'm sure there's a better term for it, but they have to kind of be able to roll into a ball and be able to fit under an airplane seat.
He says, did you say donuts?
I did say donut. I know you're retired, but you still don't get donuts. To be able to roll in a ball and sit under a chair in a restaurant, or sit under a bench in a restaurant or a mall or someplace, so that they can be out of the way of the general public when they're not moving through space. And so he was developing some arthritis in his back and hips that made it not possible for him to comfortably ride in airplanes, be in the car for long periods of time, and to be able to scrunch up in that tight little ball that he needed to be able to fit in tighter spaces in restaurants and other public places that would, make sure that he could do his job while also not being in the way of other people. So we talked to our vet and talked to canine companions and decided together that it was time for him to retire. And so we filled out the retirement paperwork, which also includes adoption paperwork. And so with Canine Companions, if you have one of their dogs, you get first rights to adopt them when they're done working, and we wanted to do that. We weren't obligated to do that, but we wanted to.
Well, he's like a part of the family.
He is a part of the family, for
Yeah.
sure.
So he came to you when he was about 2?
He was about 2. Well, he'd really been in training his whole life, but he had been through 18 months of intensive training in their center in Ohio. He had been raised by wonderful puppy raisers in Michigan. And the puppy raisers get a manual about this big, it's about 500 pages, of how they need to raise the puppy and what skills they need to teach the puppy so that they can then graduate and go into that intensive training and become a service dog.
So do you have any contact with the puppy raisers and
We
let them know
do.
that Noobs is retiring?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
We text each other and send each other Christmas cards and our Facebook friends. And so we are constantly, throughout his entire decade of working, giving them updates on where he's been and what he's been doing, how he helped our daughter. And then we let them know that he has retired and that we've adopted him. And so now he's our very nicely trained pet.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, like we see service animals and we see emotional support animals and we see animals on planes, not snakes on planes, but animals on planes. And I tell the story that I actually sat next to a potbelly pig on a plane one time. That was for.
Yeah.
So can you tell us just like what's the service animal, what's the emotional support animals? There's lots of animals out there, and I know they have different designations.
Right. Well, it's interesting how this has been in the news quite a bit, especially because of airlines having trouble with people wanting to bring peacocks and even emotional support animals for their emotional support animal onto planes. One of the things that the folks at Canine Companions for Independence always say is that a service dog is more than a vest. And so to be a service dog, it's not that you go out on the internet or in a catalog, get something that says, I'm a service dog, and there you go. There's a lot of training, and there are standards. There are international standards for service animals. So the first type, which is what Newbury is an assistance or a service dog. And so that's the highest level of training and the highest level of public access. So basically where their human is allowed to go in terms of public access, they should be allowed to go. There are some exceptions in terms of private entities, private homes, things like that. But just as a general rule, if it's someplace where the public is welcomed in, museums, movie theaters, airplanes, restaurants, the dog is allowed to go. That doesn't mean they can go everywhere. You know, for example, if you and I go to a restaurant, because of health codes, we can't just barge into the kitchen. Or if you and I go to a hospital, we can't just barge into an operating room because we feel like we have public access. So same thing with the dogs. So, you know, if the general public is not allowed to go to a certain restricted area, then the dog would not be allowed to go as well. And then kind of a step down from that is what you would call like your therapy animal. And so a therapy animal, like I was saying earlier, what really distinguishes the service dog is they do jobs. They are very well behaved, and they're trained to be very well behaved because they have public access, and they don't, you don't want to be disturbing the public when you have your service dog out and about. But they do very specific jobs. Newbury knows over 42 different specific behaviors that he does to assist my daughter. And so a therapy dog is a dog that they may do some training and some testing with to test temperament and to test that they will be well behaved in a public space. But they aren't trained to do specific jobs for an individual with a disability. So a therapy dog is not a dog that you should be seeing in a restaurant or a movie theater. A therapy dog is only allowed in the therapeutic setting where they have been invited. So you'll see therapy dogs in hospitals, you'll see therapy dogs in therapy clinics, but you should not see a therapy dog out and about in the grocery store or you know, in other public areas. They really only go where they're invited to go to help patients engage in therapy or to help calm patients or to help give a distraction to patients. So that's kind of the difference with the therapy dog. That an emotional support dog kind of is what the title says. They're there for the comfort and the emotional support for the person that owns them or is working with them or what have you. But they haven't been specifically trained in terms of behavior or in terms of specific tasks to do for that person. And that can confuse some people because there are service animals that do perform specific jobs for people with PTSD and for people with certain mental health conditions, but they are distinguished from an emotional support dog because they do actually perform specific behaviors to help that person with their particular disability. So that's where the big difference is.
Thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
I actually didn't even think about the whole category of therapy dogs going into hospitals. So, I never, really knew anything about, he's my first point of origin about a service dog. So can you tell us, it's not for everybody. It's not like, here's a pet. I was just blown away with the amount of work that you as a family and the strict guidelines that you guys have to follow, especially with this company. I would, there's other companies out there, I would say this is probably the gold standard company that started it all.
Yeah, this non-for-profit's been around for over 30 years. And they abide by what's called the International Association of Assistance Dog Partners standards in their training and in their execution of training these dogs. And yeah, it's a process and it is a commitment. Right. It's not something that I think people should get into lightly, and it's also not something that is a substitute for supervision of a child with autism or anything like that. It would be, they are dogs, and dogs require handlers. And so it would not be appropriate to think that a service dog could unilaterally or by itself keep a child with autism safe who elopes. They might be useful in helping to slow them down, or may be useful in terms of, for example, you see he has 2 leashes here. Mm-hmm. This one is the one that my daughter would hold. I have it kind of tucked up in his vest. And then this one is the one that is used to handle him and, basically help him with his behavior. That kept us together as a team because we were part of a skilled companion team because my daughter can't handle him by herself. So that would help with elopement, but it would be my responsibility to make sure my daughter didn't elope. It would not be something that would be the responsibility of a service dog to make sure that she didn't elope. So you have to have very realistic expectations of what a service dog can and should do. You know, like I said, we went through about 40 hours of training just to make sure we didn't undo all of his good training. And you know, you have to really get the skills down to handle the dog, to give them a command, to correct them if they're not behaving appropriately in public, and to you know, follow those rules. You know, service dogs are not supposed to bark, shake, eat, lick people in public. They're not supposed to do things that are disruptive like that, run up and sniff people, or they're not supposed to be too far away from their recipient. They're supposed to be on leash and under control at all times. They should not ever, you know, eat off the floor or lick the floor in a restaurant. You just have to be really respectful of the people around you when you have a service dog. Yes, they have to perform their job, but at the same time, they shouldn't be engaging in behaviors that are disruptive or that other people might find, you know, distasteful, like licking the floor and things like that. Plus, it's for their health. You don't want a service animal. A lot has been invested in them in terms of breeding and training, and so you don't want the dog eating people scraps and people food and licking the floor and eating food off the floor, because then you can't control what goes into their diet.
Right. So speaking of that, like, I know that you had to keep his weight within a certain range. You have to, because you're bringing him into restaurants, you have to keep him at a certain level of clean. Yes. Tell us about like some of the other, you know, just, you know, requirements of having, you know, him, and that he's not just, you know, a pet, and there, you know, there's a lot of responsibility.
Yes, a lot of responsibility.
You gonna chime in there, bud?
Okay.